Well, Member of Parliament for Akachi South, who's also member of the committee, Ben Ahiafo, says the bill will now have the support of minority MPs. If you recall, yesterday they were up in arms against it. He says changes to the draft document are substantial.
Under the law, but the law itself has an amendment introduced which has prescribed the offense and then the penalty that goes with the offense, and the minimum will be 100 penalty unit and the maximum will be 500 penalty unit. So Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs have done a lot of amendment to the bill, and I'm looking forward to see the members of Parliament also carrying on a lot of amendment to the bill.
So if I get it,
sure that the bill is actually taking care of the situation. So, but my personal worry is that I tried looking at the coronavirus bill of the United Kingdom. It's very elaborate. It's about 360-something pages document. But Ghana, we need to take our time and also come out with a very elaborate law which will be general in nature. The UK is peculiar to coronavirus, but it is very elaborate. But for me, what we are doing is scanty, which may not cover all aspects of the emergency situations, disaster situations, or situations of similar nature.
So, but from the deliberations this morning, now the bill in the format per the amendments that are being made will now have the support of the minority in Parliament.
Yes, the bill will now have the support of the minority in Parliament.
That's because the new bill,
a lot of inputs at the committee consideration.
So the concerns that give too much power to the president, the real work bill.
We have imposed limitations on the powers of the president, such that the president is not going to act alone. He will act in accordance with the advice from a relevant institution, and the relevant institution would be discussed. The president does no longer even have power to impose penalty by executive instrument. The penalty is also being prescribed by the law. And then anytime the president is going to impose restriction in an emergency, disaster or similar circumstances, there must be a justifiable reason in accordance with the spirit of the Constitution.
And for you, that takes care of the concerns about the powers in the original bill being too broad.
Yes.
Hence, it would have the support of the minority.
In the original bill, the powers were unaffected, as and when the president decides. Then he will impose the restrictions, but we tidy it up such that he will not have such an absolute power. He will have to act in accordance with the Constitution as well as the provisions of the bill when passed into law.
Joseph Opoku-Gakpo joins me from Parliament. Joseph, one of the key things right now, and I have tons of messages here from our viewers, every single message here is asking the NIA to stop. Has Parliament, representatives of the people, said anything about the NIA registration that is still ongoing, massing people up in these, what the Minister of Health calls dangerous times?
Did come up on the floor. Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, the MP for North Tongue, made the point in the course of discussions on what they call the business agenda, which is what the House will be doing next week, and asking that in the light of the President's directive, he's expecting a situation where the National Identification Authority should have been directed by government to pull brakes on what is happening. And he indicated that one of the things he's looking forward to doing next week will be to get the Minister for monitoring and evaluation summoned. That's Dr. Kuto Uswefriye, who happens to be the Member of Parliament for the Tafo-Pankrono constituency. Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, says he's filing an urgent question to get the minister summoned to come respond to questions on how come the NIA is not being asked to pull brakes on the process. And he makes the point that Mr. Ablakwa has heard within the media the NIA Chief Executive, Professor Kenatefwa, making the point that he actually is working based on directives from above. And so he sees it that Professor Kenatefua is actually operating under a higher power than himself in his decision to continue the registration process. So Mr. Blakwa says he would ensure that the minister gets someone to Parliament to come respond to questions. The interesting bit is that even after he raised that particular issue and gave that hint, when the majority leader, Oseichi Mensah-Bonsu, responded to the issues, the majority leader did not comment specifically on the substance of the issues, except to say that it's not part of the discussions as was captured in the business statement, which is the agenda for next week. So he virtually didn't respond to the concern and the request that Mr. Blakwa made, but we're waiting to see when that question gets filed and how soon the Minister for Monitoring and Evaluation, Dr. Dr. Akutosei, will be summoned to Parliament to come respond to questions on that.
Finally, Joseph, the number has risen to 16. The number of the cases risen to 16. I believe the Parliament has heard of it. What has the reaction been?
Gift, if you can say that again, it's a little difficult here.
I'm saying that the number of the cases, coronavirus cases here in Ghana has now risen to 16. I believe the Parliament has heard it. What has been the reactions from both the minority and the majority sides in Parliament?
They're hoping that, particularly for the majority side, when the necessary legislation gets passed, it may help to a certain extent in helping contain the situation. The focus of the House for several hours now has actually been specifically on that legislation and not exactly a conversation on how the numbers are going or anything like that. On the floor itself, it's really not come up for a conversation. Mainly on the floor have been concerns about how Parliament continuing to sit in the light of the issues about them being more than 25 people and several numbers gathering. Earlier in the day, there was the distribution of masks among members of Parliament. So the Speaker himself, Professor Michael Quay, as well as the members of Parliament, as and when they are getting into the chamber, we would have the situation of the masks being handed over to them. And that generated some conversation on the floor, and members of Parliament asking questions about whether themselves they know how to make use of the mask and how that can help ensure the necessary protection. That has been the main conversation right on the floor of Parliament. And one proposal that's come from the majority leader is that the House continues sitting even going into tomorrow, which is a Saturday, although it's not a working day, so that then they can approve other bills having to do with other aspects of the management of the state. But in terms of the issues with the rising numbers are not matters that have yet come up for a conversation on the floor itself.
Talking about the legislation, I said finally, but let's make this the final one. Talking about the legislation, we just heard from the people you spoke to that it looks like they've reached a certain consensus. Are we looking at a very an immediate passage of that law?
So that's exactly the case, that from what we're actually saying, we're looking forward to what is most likely going to be a very long evening, because the indication is that the House is currently on break. They've suspended sitting for some time now. They were expected to come back at 3. The expectation is that when they come back, the Committee on Constitutional and Legal Affairs will be presenting its report and also specific recommendations on amendments that need to be made to the legislation that was brought to the House. And from what the members of Parliament on both the majority and the minority side are telling us, an agreement has been reached to both limit the powers of the President, as was contained in the original bill, and as well ensure a situation where if the President has to declare a situation of restrictions, he needs to do the necessary consultations, and if people flout the legislation and they need to be punished, the President will not be the one to determine the punishment. So from the understanding we get in, those agreements have been reached, and when they come to the floor, they will move ahead with the amendments with both the support of the majority and the minority MPs. And going into the evening, they're hoping to get that particular legislation passed before the close of day today. Joseph, thank you. And will be a great job you've done for us in Parliament over the period. Thank you so much for that. And we'll be getting to Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, if not here on this show, in our subsequent bulletin to find out how it all ends up in Parliament.